Trauma responses. Let's talk about them. Let's talk about our trauma responses. Mainly because I feel like we don't talk about this enough. Sometimes because we don't understand it. We don't actually have the awareness to understand what is going on and why we're reacting or behaving in the way that we are. And other times, I think there's almost like this bypassing or downplaying of what we're experiencing, doing, or behaving as a trauma response. I honestly believe that when you choose to heal and not be controlled by your trauma anymore, we somehow subconsciously create this internal narrative or view of never wanting to have a victim mindset again. It's like, I've done this work, I've healed my trauma, I can never be a victim again. We see and identify the ways in which we had a victim mentality, of course, that's part of healing and self awareness. But it's like, yeah, once I've done this, I can never revert back to that. But we are cyclical beings and we gravitate to what we know. So if you have had a victim mentality, whether intentional or not intentional, for a really long time and you've healed that part and you've moved forward, there are going to be times that you revert to a victim mentality. It might look a little bit different or it might be on a different topic or theme, but it's going to happen, even when you don't want it to. And part of healing and becoming self aware is then identifying when you're falling back into that pattern and coming out of it again. Unfortunately, healing trauma is a never ending thing. And when you've experienced significant trauma and you've lived with that for quite a long time, it's more likely that you are going to have to process and move through cycles and patterns that you've had previously. It also doesn't mean that you're really in it, right? And when I say that, like if you have a victim mentality, that doesn't mean that you are back stuck in your trauma. What it might mean is that there is just something that needs to be seen, something that is coming up for you that you haven't identified yet, or something that needs to be shifted, right? So I don't want you to hear this and then create some big story about it because we don't have to do that. Sometimes our patterns and cycles and behaviors are just there as part of a cycle, but we don't have to make them anything more than what they are. So you might have a stage where things are going bad or there's stress in your life and your inner critic's really loud. Just because your inner critic's saying something that it used to say to you 15 years ago doesn't mean that you're back in the same situation that you were 15 years ago, right? And as with not wanting to have a victim mentality or be the person that we used to be, not that there was anything wrong with who you used to be, I also don't think that people don't like to admit when they're having a trauma response, especially after they've done their healing work. It's like, again, we go through this story of, I've had these trauma responses, I've had these triggers, I've lived like this for so long and I've healed and I don't want to go back there. And naturally, there are going to be feelings and emotions attached to the past, but we feel like there's something wrong if you have a trauma response to something. It's like, what's wrong with me? Nothing. Right? And maybe you're worried that people will view you differently. Maybe you judge yourself because you should be past this, in air quotes. Or maybe you feel like it's wrong to admit that sometimes you are just still impacted by your trauma. And how human of you. We are all impacted by our trauma at some stage, right? In the future, we will be. And I want to normalize what it is to have a trauma response. And while I do normalize it, I realize that there really is no way to, like, there's no normal trauma response, right? When I say you're having a trauma response, there is no one size fits all when it comes to this. It's not, trauma responses don't look the same for everybody. And that can sometimes be why we question whether that's what's happening. It can also be why people judge us. You might hear people judge other people about the way they're behaving because it's different to how they would react and how they would feel. So let's look at some of the reactions that are also trauma responses, or let's just call them trauma responses. Let's look at some of the trauma responses that people can have. Honoring that this is not a complete list, because I think it would be impossible for me to list every single type of trauma response people have. But let's go. One would be shutting down or detaching. So if you're faced with something and you might have the trauma response to shut down or detach. If you have, I guess, grown up with violence or abuse or anything like that, you might have been taught at a young age that if you just don't say anything, then they'll, like, you'll get left alone. Or sometimes it can be more significant of that, like where we just completely leave our body because that's what you've had to do in the past. On the flip side of that, you might rage. Your trauma response might be to rage, to get really angry, to get, you know, not abusive, but like really angry at different things. Or you might start fights or really overreact, to something that might not seem like a big deal. If you are triggered in that trauma response, you might start a fight. And that might happen if, you have either grown up or seen or been around or been with someone who just constantly fights. If you haven't been shown how to communicate when things are heightened in a way that calms the situation, of course you're not going to know how to do that, right? Growing up, if you were brought up in a house where your parents just yelled at each other or your parents yelled at you, then naturally you're going to yell as well. Because it's like, well, this isn't right. And we just yell because that's what we do. And it's really interesting. I see so many of my clients and community, but also other people who get really fearful about certain things in their life, like becoming an adult and not wanting to be like their parents. If you grew up with an alcoholic parent, there can be a real fear around having kids because you don't want to be an alcoholic. You don't want to treat your kids the way that you were treated. And it's big. It's big, big work. And I think it would be harmful to say or expect that you would never have a reaction the same as your parent, because sometimes you do. But I also think that when people come into life with very consciously not wanting to do things the way that their parents did things, they're more inclined to do things differently. Another trauma response might be overworking yourself and being hyper, hyper independent and the overachiever, because you were taught that you aren't anything or you aren't worthy until you're successful. Or, if you don't have a degree or a qualification or an achievement, then you're not worth my time. Or compared to someone else who does have that. Being the good girl is a trauma response. Being a people pleaser is a trauma response. So if you notice yourself being like, when things feel tense or something's not going right, you naturally go into people pleasing mode, do whatever you can to make the other person comfortable, or being the good girl. Yes, 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 of course. Of course, I'll do that. I wouldn't dare disagree with you. That's a trauma response, right? Depending on what you've experienced, and this isn't just from family, right? This could be an abusive relationship. It could be a work environment. If you've been bullied in the workplace, it could be a sexual assault. It could be, there's so many things that triggers and causes you to go into to experience trauma. And, you have this response. And again, everyone is going to respond differently, right? Another trauma response is autopilot, you know, and going, reverting to scrolling through your phone or watching Netflix or, playing games on your phone, or I don't know, eating really shit food, or not exercising, or over exercising. That mode where it's just you function and you operate and you're doing things, but you're not actually thinking about it. It's like, I'm just safe because I don't have to think about what I'm doing. I'm just running on autopilot. Let's go. And as I said, everybody's trauma response is different. You could have five people experience the same thing and they could all have a different trauma response. These won't happen all the time. I think that's also important to recognize. You might find that, you might be faced with a certain situation and you don't have a reaction at all, and then randomly you do. It's the same as being triggered. You could be exposed to something and not be triggered, and then one time there's just something different, something about it, or even it could just be like your state of mind, or where you're at, and you experience something and then you're triggered again. And I guess it really sucks. It really sucks that this can happen, especially when you spend so much time healing. And unfortunately, that is just the reality. We don't know how we're going to respond to certain things. We can try and predict it and try and control it, but sometimes we just have no control over it. So, let me give you an example what I mean by people can have different responses or different trauma responses. Let's say you have an argument with someone. Could be your partner, could be a friend, could be a family member. Doesn't matter. You have an argument with someone. One person might shut down, dissociate because of their fear. They're worried that they're going to be abused or yelled at, or for fear of retaliation. So it's like you're having this argument and you just blanket over your face. I'm out. Just completely shut off. Another person might escalate and yell because, again, as I said earlier, they were never shown how to speak calmly, and they don't know how to calm their nervous system when it's heightened. So it's like, all right, we're going at it. And then we say things and do things, and it can be really, really hard to pull yourself back from that. One might run. And what I mean by that, well, they might physically run, but leave. They might, if it's a relationship, they might break up with them. If it's a friendship, they might cut that friendship. You know, if it's family, families can be a little bit more challenging, but it might be that they just don't talk to them for quite a while. And that can be because it's safer to be alone in their mind. It's safer to be alone because then you can't get hurt. If I run, no, this is too risky, I'm not going here. Or it triggers something that they don't want to look at, right? They're not ready to address or move through something. One might apologize, even if they've done nothing wrong. There's that good girl, that people pleasing, that, it's easier. It's easier to keep the peace when there's an argument by apologizing, by doing whatever the other person wants. Easier short term, maybe. Long term, not at all. And one might check out, suppress it, pretend that nothing happened, and just kind of, you know, continue on. That's a form of autopilot. As you can see, there are so many different ways that you could respond to certain situations. And your trauma response isn't anything to be ashamed of. It is so normal, in fact, that it's kind of upsetting that we hide from it. For me and my partner, he is more on the reactive side and I detach. So I'm a runner. I used to be a runner. I very much used to be a runner. There used to be this in joke with my friends that my relationships had an expiry date of 3 months, because every 3 months, at the first sign of trouble, I would run. And now, not a runner anymore, but I shut down. And I know that for Chris, my partner, he can be quite reactive. And again, that aligns with, you know, his background, how he's brought up, the relationships that he's had, all of that kind of thing. Whereas for me, getting in an argument is real, like I naturally feel myself withdraw. And so my response to that is to shut down. One, I don't want to say anything that I regret or that I don't mean. I don't want to cause harm. But two, I don't want, I don't want to yell. But it is my natural instinct to just dissociate. Part of that is because I don't want. I'm getting really emotional talking about this. I don't even know why. I don't want it to get to a point where he might say something to me that he doesn't mean or that is really hurtful to me. And it's the same with friends. You know, if friends and I are having an argument, I again withdraw. I'll come back to it and I'll talk about it at a later date when I've had time to process it and think about what I want to say. But my trauma response is to shut down because I've had so many horrible things said to me and said about me. And I am so scared of having that feeling again, of having someone that I love and care about say something that can really, really hurt me. Oh, holy fuck, that was emotional. Um, and obviously I'm processing this in real time as an example. But also saying that, of course, we're not going to go out and just be like, well, I just have announced to the world what my trauma response is. It's to shut down. Shut down. Autopilot. I'm very good at autopilot. but I mean, for general people, I'm not going to go to the gym tomorrow and go, hey, guess what, guys? I figured out what my trauma response is. Right. But acknowledging what is happening and having some compassion for how we're responding rather than judging ourselves is what we need to do. Right? We need to be able to see that. And for me, even just speaking to you right now and having that response and deeper insight is like, oh, okay. All right, this is something that I can communicate with him later. Because a lot of the time he's like, why do you do that? Why do you just stop talking? Why do you shut down? Or why do you walk away? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. Like, I haven't been able to figure it out. And now I know. So thank you. Thank you, listeners, for being here and for me doing this podcast. With that being said, if you know that autopilot is one of your go-to trauma responses, even if it's not, but I kind of think that every single person has autopilot as a trauma response. We go to scrolling or we go to Netflix or we go to just, moving about our days, then, and you're ready to go deeper in the sense of like you're ready to get out of that, there are two incredible offers that I have for you right now, and they're both free. They're both free. Clearly, I'm very passionate about people, my community, getting out of autopilot because I know how limiting it is. When we think about bringing our visions to life and focusing on our future, autopilot is a real fucking killer, right? So, the first option that you have, if you haven't already, I have a new free guide, Autopilot as a Trauma Response. And this guide will help you understand how and why you revert to autopilot, some of the signs and the patterns that you might have as autopilot, and it will also help you, and more importantly, it will help you move through your autopilot ways by recognizing your patterns and shifting your focus. This is a really in-depth, juicy, meaty, I don't know if that's the right word, but we're going to go with that, guide. Like, this just isn't a 2-page download this and answer some questions. This is both informative and inquisitive. So again, the link is in the show notes. The second offer that I have, and this is the first time that I've mentioned this, I am hosting another free masterclass. This is my first for the year, actually. I used to do them every month, but hello, mum life. I'm hosting a free masterclass on Wednesday, the 4th of March at 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time. I don't think Daylight Savings will be finished by then. I think it finishes that weekend. Bear with me on that one. But the free masterclass is Stop Living on Autopilot and Start Living Your Dreams. This is the next step from the guide. And this masterclass is going to show you how to move beyond living on autopilot as a trauma response and really start to bring your visions to life. This is going to take your self awareness and connection to yourself even deeper. And during the 75 minutes together, we're going to explore why awareness and motivation aren't enough to create the change that you desire. Big call. The reasons why you might be struggling to create change, because there are some really obvious reasons that you may be aware of or may not, and what to do to get yourself off autopilot and into conscious aligned living. Again, this is going to be such an incredible masterclass, and I'm so excited to bring this to you because this work matters. It matters so much, especially for you, because I know that you want more for yourself. I know that this current stuckness that you're feeling, you're done with. So, to download the guide or to register for the masterclass on the 4th of March, the link is in the show notes below. Please go click on that, download them, sign up. Can't wait to have you in there. And I hope this episode was helpful. As I said, I just really wanted to normalize what it is to, like, what to normalize trauma responses, because so often we just think that there's something wrong with us, or we downplay it, or we dismiss it, or we hate on ourselves, when in actual fact there is a really obvious reason that you're responding that in that way. And when we can have when we have the insight to see that it is a trauma response, we generally have more compassion for ourselves. So if you love this episode, if you want to hear more, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. But I can't wait to see you next week, and I can't wait to see you at the masterclass on the 4th.